Infidelity often leads to destruction in relationships and human lives. Losing trust, feeling betrayed, and the breakdown of relationships can even trigger divorce. This film tells the story of a wife's emotional affair in a subtle and touching way. We are introduced to the Sumner family, who initially appear happy. Edward Sumner is a husband, and Connie Sumner is his wife, who stays at home taking care of the family. They have been married for 11 years and have a son named Charlie. One day, Connie went to attend a charity auction party. On her way back, Connie was involved in a car accident and ended up in the arms of a man named Paul, who turned out to be a book salesman. Due to the bad weather, Paul invited Connie to take shelter in his home filled with books. After tending to Connie's wound, she borrowed Paul's phone to call her son Charlie and inform him that she would be late to pick him up. While Connie was on the phone, Paul surprised her by touching the wound on her knee and holding her hand. Before leaving, Paul gave her a book. When Connie arrived home, she told her husband, Edward, about her encounter with Paul. Edward suggested that Connie send a bottle of wine as a thank you to Paul. Upon opening the book given by Paul, Connie found a piece of paper with Paul's phone number. Connie then went to a payphone to call Paul. During the conversation, Paul invited Connie to have coffee at his place as a gesture of thanks. Even though Connie had already had coffee, she couldn't refuse Paul's invitation. When Connie arrived at Paul's house, he served her coffee. It could be said that Paul was an expert in the art of seduction. Every gesture, word, and tone of his voice seemed to break down Connie's moral defenses. At one point, Paul instructed Connie to close her eyes, then guided her hand towards a braille book. They held hands, and Connie felt a warmth in her body. However, fearing she couldn't resist her desires, Connie ultimately decided to leave. Despite their brief encounter, it left a deep impression on Connie. She often found herself imagining Paul, even when she was next to her husband, Edward. The next day, Connie visited Paul again. Paul welcomed her by inviting her to dance. Connie was swept away by the music and Paul's compliments. However, when Paul attempted to kiss her, Connie realized she was another man's wife. Connie hurriedly left, but had to return because she had left her coat behind. At that moment, Connie couldn't control herself. Afterward, Connie seemed remorseful on the journey home, envisioning Paul's touch. However, her regret was short-lived. Just 2 days later, Connie visited Paul again and even took the initiative herself. Now they began to openly display affection in public, and her relationship with Paul started to impact her marriage with Edward. Edward began to notice the changes in Connie, especially after hearing news from his friend's wife that Connie did not attend the charity auction as claimed. Edward's suspicion of Connie's infidelity reached its peak. When Edward invited Connie to lunch, she claimed to have a charity auction event. Edward became suspicious and eventually contacted Connie's regular salon, which confirmed that there were no reservations for Connie that day. Believing Connie was having an affair, Edward sent a detective to tail his wife. On the other hand, Connie secretly prepared to meet Paul. When she met her husband's friends at the cafe, Connie lied to sneak off and see Paul. In the cafe's restroom, Connie and Paul finally engaged in intimacy. Unsatisfied, Connie headed straight to Paul's house to continue their affair. Due to her addiction to this forbidden relationship, Connie began neglecting her duties as a homemaker. That night, Edward pretended to go on a work trip, creating an opportunity for Connie to meet Paul again. They got lost in their affection, until Connie had to rush home to pick up her son. Meanwhile, Edward was with a detective who showed him photos of Connie and Paul's affair. Edward looked very sad and hurriedly left in his car. On the other hand, Connie had just returned from shopping and saw Paul embracing another woman. Realizing that Paul had been using her, Connie slapped them both. Paul claimed that Connie was just a friend, then invited her back to his apartment, where they reignited their romance. When Edward arrived in front of Paul's apartment, he saw Connie just coming out. Edward then hurried to meet Paul. There, Edward told Paul about someone's affair. Initially, Paul didn't understand, but he began to comprehend after Edward mentioned Connie's name. Edward's emotions overflowed when he saw the crystal ball he had given to Connie in Paul's house. Edward then took the gift and brutally struck Paul's head repeatedly. Upon realizing that he had just taken someone's life, Edward quickly wrapped Paul's body in a blanket, intending to flee. Suddenly, Paul's phone received a voicemail from Connie wanting to end their affair because she felt guilty for hurting her husband and child. Connie was watching her son's performance when Edward arrived, seemingly without guilt. It turned out that Edward had hidden Paul's body in the trunk of his car. As they drove home, someone accidentally bumped into Edward's car trunk. The person panicked at the thought of discovering the body. When they attempted to inspect the trunk, Edward swiftly exited and tidied up the open trunk. After dropping off their child at home, Edward went to a garbage disposal site to dispose of Paul's body, leaving Connie behind at the school. A few days later, 2 detectives arrived at Edward's residence looking for Connie regarding Paul's reported disappearance by his wife. Despite being taken aback, Connie chose to act as if she didn't know Paul. However, the police found Connie's phone number at Paul's house. Connie explained that it was because she was a customer at his bookstore, and the police eventually left due to insufficient evidence. During lunch, Connie informed Edward about the detective's visit. Edward inquired about the missing individual and why they had met Connie. Connie claimed that Edward couldn't possibly know because the man was just a regular book vendor. In reality, both Edward and Connie found themselves in a difficult situation. Edward feared being exposed as Paul's murderer, while Connie feared her affair with Paul being uncovered. The next morning, Edward was filled with doubts and asked his wife if it would be better for them to move out of town. In silence, Edward left the house to go to his office as usual. Later that evening, the 2 detectives returned to meet Connie. Edward was also there, listening to their conversation. The detectives informed Connie that Paul's body had been found in a landfill, and inquired about the last time she had met Paul. Connie pretended to forget, but as the detectives continued to press, Edward asked them to return because, according to Edward, his wife had told them everything. In the next scene, things took a turn when Connie picked up Edward's clothes from the laundry, and found a photo of her affair with Paul in Edward's suit pocket. Connie now realized that her husband had known about her affair all along but kept it hidden from the detectives. That night, Edward told Connie that he had discovered her infidelity, and as a result of that affair he unintentionally killed Paul. At that moment, Connie was devastated by what had happened to her family, but she knew it was all her own fault. Connie then burned the photo of her and Edward as if to erase all their memories, and she resolved to start fresh with Edward and their son Charlie. Their son Charlie, who was very sensitive, felt guilty, thinking he was the cause of his parents' arguments, and appeared deeply saddened. Connie reassured him that Charlie was the precious treasure that brought happiness to both Edward and herself. One morning, Connie was looking through her wedding album with Edward while Edward played the piano with Charlie. Connie rediscovered a gift from Edward, which she had given to Paul. Beneath the crystal ball, she found words of love for her from Edward, along with a photo of them together when Charlie was just 1 year old. Now Connie understood how deeply Edward loved her, and how much pain he felt upon learning of her affair. In the final scene, Edward and Connie attend an auction, and on their way home, Edward stops the car in front of the police station. He tells Connie that turning himself in might be the best course of action for them, but Connie disagrees because she doesn't want to lose her caring and loving husband. Connie suggests they go abroad, change their identities and start fresh. They embrace and the movie ends. Although the ending of this film is a bit sad, thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.